Let's go back in time to 1932 as Converse brings you historic footage of the legendary original Celtics with whom all great professional teams are compared.
We have now taken over your radio.
Richie Guerin is about to show you the most important step in getting past a man. It's the first one.
And Oscar will inbound it. The men in green, the Milwaukee Bucks, that's Alcindor against Bellamy.
Has Jordan. Allen shakes. Gray gets two.
Gilmore on
big stuff. Brother.
lead Toledo artists. You get 21.
4:28 to go in the first quarter for the Cow Palace. Here's Barry.
Jordan. Open. Chicago with the lead.
Hello, and welcome back to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason Mann, and with me, as always, is Rich Craich. Rich, great to be back with you, although it's for a sad reason.
Yeah, unfortunately, we get these, and we were kind of wrestling with this idea, and we've done it from time to time, since we've been doing this podcast now for a little over a year of, when these sort of things happen, when, an NBA legend passes away, who is worthy of, us dropping everything and doing a podcast? And it's not that not all of them are, because we've done a few where we've, kind of unfortunately combined, guys that have recently passed away or whatever. But this one was kind of a no-brainer. The second it happened, I think you messaged me, I messaged you, and we were just like, yeah, we have to do this, because maybe not, an all-time great legendary player, but an all-time great legendary character in NBA history and basketball history, really. So, yeah, it was a no-brainer that this guy deserved a special podcast for him.
Absolutely. Darryl Dawkins died at age 58 this week, and was just a influential character in terms of very colorful. Helped, I think, lead to sort of a rise in the NBA of the dunk as sort of a marketing tool that kind of brought young people. And I definitely know that for me, when I was a kid growing up in the mid to late 80s, like, even though he was basically done with his career by then, the rim shattering, glass shattering slam dunk was definitely something that, like, I knew about, and that I knew he had done it, and that was just like that was part of, like, this, lure of basketball, was seeing all these guys and have these great dunks. His teammate Dr. J and that sort of thing. So, an incredible character. A really interesting guy. He was a guy who, when we first started talking about doing the Over and Back podcast, he was a guy that was, on the short list for guys that we, want to do a show on. Never got the chance until now, but and we, we'll kind of get through some of the particulars of his career later on in the show, but we wanted to start off. We have a very special guest, Yago Colas, who writes for at yagocolas.com. He writes about the culture of basketball. He also has an upcoming book on that subject called Ball Don't Lie, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But Yago, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
And so, Dawkins, the first thing that stands out to me is that is just, the incredible, gamesmanship, and the great dunks that I do think, like, during that time period in the late 70s and early 80s, there was, I think, more of an openness for the NBA to kind of embrace the dunk, like, as an organization. I mean, players would certainly do it from time to time. Early on in the NBA's history, the dunk was viewed as, something you didn't do, was showing you up. If you did it, you'd get knocked down. Later in the 60s and 70s, it became more, accepted, at least in the program, and in the college game, it was banned for a while. But I think, by the late 70s, early 80s, it was something that, like, the NBA was opening up as, to be a real major part of how it marketed the game. And that was, during a time for that and for other reasons that the NBA grew in great popularity. Do you think of him as a big contributor to dunk culture? Do you kind of agree that, what are kind of some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great topic. I think you've got the chronology pretty much right, in the sense that it was definitely over the period of time between the late 70s and through the early mid 80s that something you could call dunk culture kind of began to appear in the NBA and among NBA fans, and then to kind of really grow. I think that it's kind of interesting when you break it down a little bit and you think about Dawkins' dunks, and you probably know that when he broke the backboard and then broke it again 3 weeks later, the NBA kind of panicked and began to levy fines for this. So I would say that I think about dunk culture in the NBA, and in general, I think about culture of basketball in relation to the NBA in terms of the sort of institutional culture that the NBA fosters, and then a more kind of subterranean, maybe even insurrectionary culture that fans of the league may tap into, that the NBA both tries to capitalize on and keep under wraps. And I think that Darryl Dawkins, as far as dunk culture goes, is definitely part of that subterranean kind of tendency or force that operates in the league. His teammate, who you mentioned, Julius Erving, of course, kind of pioneered the halftime dunk contest at the All-Star game with his 76 free throw line dunk in the ABA. And I think that, he probably had more to do with dunking in a way that the NBA began to feel might lend excitement to the game. Dawkins probably in a way that the NBA felt was a bit alarming. His dunks, I think, express the kinds of things that dunks can express: strength, force, rage, destruction, and that the NBA is not all that comfortable with as values that they want to promote, and especially as values that they would like. That is to say, they wouldn't like to see those values embodied by a large black man. So I think there's a way in which for the NBA, Erving was probably more of a gateway for the dunking of, say, Jordan, which, of course, the NBA loved and marketed all over the world, than Dawkins, who I think was a little bit too much on the edge of what the NBA was scared of. Don't forget that he was doing this, breaking backboards around the time that Kermit Washington was breaking Rudy Tomjanovich's face with his punch. And so there's an association of dunking with violence, with blackness, all those kinds of things that the NBA gets real nervous about.
Mm-hmm. In another way, he was kind of a threat to the kind of the way things were at the time, was that he was the first NBA player and only the second, in either league to be drafted straight out of high school. And,
exactly.
It's interesting. I think how that sort of filters into how he is perceived. He was always sort of perceived as someone who had raw talent, but didn't necessarily make the most of that talent, which I think
right.
is, there is some, I think, validity to that. At least it seemed like he could have done more. And his teammates talk about that, maybe his practice habits weren't the best or whatever. But I do feel like that's also a convenient way for fans to look to sort of thumb their nose down at a player.
Yeah.
And certainly I think there's a lot of racially based, views, regarding that. A fan might see someone who just looks like they should be able to dominate and doesn't quite understand why, and that, and that kind of obviously that reflects upon other things in society for people who have benefits and people who don't.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, when I encounter that sort of attitude, judgmental attitude about players who appear not to be achieving their potential or what have you, I always just kind of wonder, and if I'm working with students, ask them, what's your stake in this exactly? That is to say, why are you invested in this player becoming a certain kind of player or achieving certain things as a player? And I wonder, too, about the single-mindedness of fans who measure the value of players in relatively narrow ways. I mean, of course, everything in sports culture leads us to be looking for players to be productive statistically and their contributions to team wins and so forth. But, sports is also entertainment, and a lot of us are into it for that reason as well. And, it may be that Dawkins is a good reminder of the value that personality and character can add to the game. And I don't mean the kind of sort of 19th century character that means you just, keep your nose to the grindstone and practice and all that, but character that reminds us that it's a game and that it's for fun. And he's enjoying himself and hopefully, helping other people to enjoy themselves. And I feel a little bad for fans that can't appreciate that or for whom worries about lost potential get in the way of just appreciating that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. It's something we've sort of talked about a lot on this podcast, and it's something that's actually doing this podcast has helped me a lot because, and not that I was always, on board with a lot of the, the hyper competitive guy. I mean, there's a lot of guys that are renowned NBA players. Your guys like a Kobe, your guys like I grew up in Chicago, a Michael Jordan or whatever, where, when I was growing up, it was like, yeah, titles, championships, wins, woo, and all that sort of stuff. And more as I've matured, I've gotten less I'm becoming less fans of those guys and more fans of guys like Darryl Dawkins who, I didn't maybe win as much as I wanted to, and I didn't do all that sort of stuff, but that, not that they're like, there's something to be said for the guys that are, not visceral, like I have to win, I have to create narratives in my head to try to take you down and destroy you and destroy, your family. And that, there's guys that, NBA guys, where that's it. And there's fans that respond to that. They think that every single NBA player needs to have this just untenable killer instinct that to win or whatever. And I've gotten older, I've been like, there are guys like that. I mean, I don't think it's an effort thing. And that's always what I've sort of grown up and sort of realized is that, maybe a Darryl Dawkins, I don't think he didn't, quote, reach his potential or whatever based off of effort. I think he was just a guy who, had a certain set of skills. And he even talks about it as well, that he came into the league and everybody said, hey, you're, tall and good. You're Wilt Chamberlain. And he was like, no. I came into the league as a high schooler. I'm in no way refined and no way ready to do this.
Exactly.
And he never really quite got it. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a guy that seems, even at the time, to be aware of his limitations or whatever. But you get a little, and then you realize a guy who sort of understands what he is then. And you kind of get that throughout his career is that, once he's just started letting the game kind of come to him and enjoy the game and entertain himself and entertain the fans and it's not like he didn't contribute to his team's winning. I mean, he was still a very good player. He just wasn't the quote, oh my God, you're 6'11", 250, and you're a strong black man. You can dominate. And it's like, well, maybe I can't. I don't have the skills to do it. And I never thought it was effort for him. And going back and looking at all this stuff that he did and just reading about his career and all that sort of stuff, you get an appreciation for a guy who just went out there and was himself. And I think there was a quote in one of the stories that I read that was great. I think it was the one that Dave Wohl wrote, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit, as former coach in Sports Illustrated. And he said one of the quotes was Darryl Dawkins said, I wouldn't change a damn thing. I always liked being Darryl Dawkins. Right. And that's perfect. I read that quote and I said, yeah. And that's a guy who, after his career, was able to sort of reconcile the fact that he was, somewhat out of the game, but was able to give the game to other people. He enjoyed the game so much when it was over, whereas some guys get so burnt out because every day is, life or death for them, where he's a guy who doesn't mind going and coaching, 10-year-old girls when, if you read his Twitter account, you see pictures of him just hanging out at rec centers or whatever and teaching people the game. He never seemed disenchanted or, disenfranchised with the game because I think he never made it anything less than something he enjoyed. And I respect that. That's a guy now that I've gotten a little bit older and doing this podcast and other stuff. I enjoyed those sort of guys that can just enjoy what they're doing and enjoy the game and enjoy themselves and be happy with what they are and what they've accomplished. And Darryl Dawkins absolutely strikes me as one of those guys that did not care kind of how his career went. I think he was very happy with what he did and what he accomplished.
I think
he should be.
Two really important points I want to stress in what you said. I think, first of all, just that you kind of rescued the fact that it's not like he sucked.
No, God.
And it's important as we kind of talk about how fans sometimes may judge him that way, to kind of emphasize that that's actually just a misperception that people may have, and they may exaggerate his weaknesses as a result of that. But I think the other point that's especially important, and I think has a lot to do with why people sometimes do make these kinds of judgments, and that is, your characterization, and by all accounts, it seemed that way to me too, that he's somebody who's comfortable in his own skin, happy being himself. And I think that there's a lot of fans that aren't. And they look to NBA players who appear that way, especially those who, aren't, who for whatever reason the fan imagines could be doing more, could be working harder. And I think there's a lot of projection on the part of fans of their own failures and their own disappointments and their own bitterness. And they kind of project those onto NBA players. And I think we see that Darryl Dawkins is not unique in this respect. But somebody who appears carefree rubs some people the wrong way who aren't carefree.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's better for the world to have people who are more about fun than necessarily just being single-minded about their jobs. I mean, I think you can respect like someone, who's just a complete professional and has awesome work ethic like Tim Duncan without feeling like denigrating Darryl Dawkins just because he didn't quite have that, even though, he had a 12-plus year career as a player, contributed to winning teams, and certainly, worked hard by, any standard, that you can basically think of. Any NBA player, of any length of a career is going to have to work very hard.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think there's the other thing that's a little bit part of that is maybe I think we get this sometimes, not just in sports, but just kind of in culture, like people who feel like that somebody's level of fame is bigger than their talent.
Yes.
And I think that really is, there's kind of an ugliness to that as well, or bigger than their production as a player in this case, that I think like if somebody, usually a lot of it's times it comes through the dunk contest, like somebody will win the dunk contest and suddenly there's heaps of expectations on them, even though they're great at dunking and they're not great at other aspects of the game. But I feel like there's definitely a backlash often when that goes poorly.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think something that contemporary fans may forget. I think I'm a bit older than you guys, just from when you mentioned that you were growing up. So I was born in the mid '60s, but a high school player today coming out has source training, conditioning, nutrition, just knowledge of the game that, for a contemporary generation of fans who are used to 18-year-olds who are, obviously they're not coming straight out of high school, but, after a year of college or a year abroad, and they have benefited from a kind of mentorship, training, knowledge about fitness and conditioning and nutrition that was not available to players coming out of high school in the 1970s. So there's also kind of two different standards at work, two different contexts that I think people may not be taking into account, depending on what generation they are, when they think about Dawkins and what he could have done. I mean, I think he probably did exactly what he could have done, and it was remarkable on a lot of fronts. As you said, an excellent individual player, contributor to some excellent teams, and a terrific entertainer, and culturally a really important figure in the history of the league.
Yeah. Do you have any specific memories that stand out to you for Dawkins?
Oh, well, yeah, sure. I mean, those Sixers teams of the late 70s leading up to the ones that won in '83 that he was no longer a member of, they were my best friend's favorite team. And I was actually born in Portland, Oregon. So at that time, I'm somewhat embarrassed to say I was a partisan of the Trailblazers. So, of course, in 1977, they faced off in the finals. And my friend and I played those games in our driveway. And I was 12, he was 13 or 14. And I was always a little bit jealous because he was the Sixers. And it looked like so much more fun to be the Sixers, including Dawkins, than to be the Blazers.
You had to share the ball, and you could
I had to
dunk,
share the ball, and I'm shooting jump shots. It's just not really fun. So yeah, I came around. At that time, I was still struggling with, who I might be and what basketball meant to me, and it still means a lot of different things to me. But that's an early memory that he's a part of there being parts of the game that were fascinating to me, but that I didn't quite have access to yet.
So Yago, you have a book coming up about the culture of basketball called Ball Don't Lie. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about it?
Right. So Ball Don't Lie is the name of the book. It will be coming out in early 2016, being published by Temple University Press. And its subtitle is Myth, Genealogies, and Invention in the Cultures of Basketball. And I mention that because each chapter addresses a myth, a genealogy, and what I call an invention for 9 different moments in the history of the game, beginning with the invention of the game by Naismith in 1891 and ending in the last chapter with LeBron's decision to leave Cleveland and go to Miami in July of 2010. And basically what I try and do for each of those moments and all the ones in between that span from the foundation of the league to the Russell-Chamberlain rivalry to the Knicks to Iverson and Jordan, is try to look at particular stories that get circulated time and again among fans that crystallize around these figures and that are oftentimes not true or, if not entirely false, not the whole truth. And I try to figure out why they do so much work for us. Why do we get so invested in them? Why do they stick and persist, even as historians and others begin to show us that the facts are a little more complicated? So I kind of look at that, and then I also try to offer a context in which we can see those myths differently with a critical eye, complicate their story a little bit, and in the end, in each invention, so there's an invention for each of these figures, I try to tell a different story about those figures, one that I think is more interesting, entertaining, fun, speaking of Darryl Dawkins and fun, but also I think one that I would say politically is more, let's say, amenable to me, in that I think what I have found in my research is that the myths that have really stuck in basketball history tend to be very conservative, if not at times authoritarian, and at times serving racist agendas, not to say that anybody in particular who is purveying those myths is racist, but simply in an institutional level that they tend to support kind of racist operations of NBA and basketball culture. So I'm interested in kind of breaking those myths up a little bit and trying to tell a different story that focuses more on the players and their creativity and their excellence and their autonomy, the ways in which they cannot be controlled or corralled, even if they may at times be exploited. And I think, in a certain sense, I think I probably mentioned Dawkins in the book. There's no special discussion of him. But, he could have an honorary chapter if I were writing it today, because I think he's a great sort of embodiment of the values that I'm trying to advance through this book of players getting free despite the cultural and institutional constraints that are frequently placed upon them.
All right. Well, that sounds really fascinating. I'm excited to check it out when it comes out. And before we'll
definitely be doing a podcast about that.
Yeah,
I feel that happening.
I'll be happy to do that.
that would be
that
great.
Is going to happen.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. And Rich and I are going to take a little break, and then we'll be back to break down some of the highlights of Darryl Dawkins' career in just a moment.
Terrific. Thanks, guys.
All right, and we are back talking more about Darryl Dawkins, Chocolate Thunder, as he was as he was better known.
Great, what an all-time great nickname.
Yeah,
I try to tell my fiance Michelle, who I was talking about tonight. I said Chocolate Thunder, and she goes, "That's not his real nickname." I was like, "No, it is. I promise." Yeah. Like, it's an all-time great. Like,
different world back then. I didn't realize, and I didn't realize that apparently Stevie Wonder named him Chocolate Thunder.
Yeah, that I had no idea until today was the first time I realized it. That's impressive. That when you get a nickname from Stevie Wonder,
yeah,
like you've arrived. Like there's nowhere to. I mean, that's the man right there.
Yeah, and I like that. I like Dawkins' quote, like, "A guy who never saw me gave me the name Chocolate Thunder." So, although I think
debatably so. I don't know. Did you see those videos on the internet? Maybe he's not.
He's part of that. I think Dawkins was even in that club of the Stevie Wonder truthers, the people who think he's actually not blind. Like I actually read something about it, and I was almost like, huh. That's kind of funny. But anyway, this is not the Stevie Wonder, whether it's Wonder is blind podcast.
What are we talking about?
Dawkins was named by Saturday Night Live as the Man of the Millennium in 1999.
I don't know about that. I'm going to have to take a little liberty with that.
Well, who contributed
the whole millennium?
Who contributed more to the millennium than Darryl Dawkins?
The whole millennium.
Yeah. I mean, he's top 10 at least.
A whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll listen to top 10. Who's the other 9 right now on the spot?
Jordan.
Okay.
Hitler. I mean, it's
it.
bad, but he was important.
It's a millennium, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Julius Caesar, is he in there?
Yeah, I believe that's the wrong millennium.
I mean, it's millennium, so
yeah,
we got a lot.
That would be that'd be the other one. I don't know.
It's a weird
me. Yeah, we'll have to table that
next podcast
discussion.
Yeah.
So he was a rookie in 1976. So he was drafted 5th in the 75 draft. He was the second player to come out straight from high school, and it was the basically 2 players did. Moses Malone was the first to do it in 74, and then 75 Dawkins did it, and also Bill Willoughby, who was basically like a journeyman who lasted like 18 years or so, didn't do all that much, and they were the last 2 before Kevin Garnett did. So, but I mean, imagine coming straight from high school in the culture of the NBA in 1976. I mean, that would be pretty difficult to do, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, like Yago said, in our earlier discussion with him, is like we kind of take it for granted now because your standard high schooler in 2015, they've been playing AAU basketball since they were 10. They've had access to pretty much any game that they want at their fingertips as long as they want. They've had trainers and coaches, nutrition and weight rooms and all that sort of stuff. It's a whole different animal, mid 70s, or late, mid to late 70s coming out of high school. I mean, it's got to be night and day compared to, those guys. And a lot of it's on a maturity level as well. And I'm always still stunned that as many guys that do come straight from high school are as mature as they are, because and of course there are situations and there's examples of guys that weren't, but man, knowing me, when I was 19, like being in a professional sport, like I can't even fathom how I would handle that, mentally and or physically. So no, it's something to be said, especially in the era that they did that and be sort of the trailblazers of it as well is impressive, because I'm sure there were a lot of guys, and I'm sure, in terms of like locker rooms and guys you deal with, I mean, these are, grown ass men that are, hanging around with an 18-year-old like that. That's different. Me and my age, I don't want to hang around with 18-year-olds. I doubt some 12-year NBA veteran wants some 18-year-old rolling up and, taking a spot on the team.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Yeah. I could see that being a.
Yeah. I think that that how it affects the team culture, the maturity stuff. I think that is sort of over a little bit when it comes in terms of, whether players should be able to come into the when they're 18.
Oh no, I am.
I mean, yeah. I mean, we don't. This isn't the time to get into a deep conversation about that, but I do think like that is an important aspect that isn't necessarily talked about. Like whether a player may be ready to contribute on the court, or at least do something on the court, but the being able to handle being a professional and and being part of a team with mature, that's a whole different thing. But I mean, and there's some evidence that that really well. I mean, his first year in 76 only played 165 minutes, so played very little. Apparently he his coach Gene Shue did not play him because he was eating chocolate bars on the bench. So and would he was in the kind of a culture.
See, that's what I would do if I was an 18-year-old.
Right.
I would be eating Twix bars all the time.
I mean, he was in a culture where guys were drinking and smoking in the locker room, and there were a lot of free spirits on that Sixers team, but they had gone from, they were the 9-win team in 73 to a 46-win team in just 3 seasons. They had Doug Collins, George McGinnis was the first year there. Steve Mix had been there for a couple years. Fred Carter had been there since the rough days, and Billy Cunningham had come back from the ABA. They also had World B. Free and Joe Bryant, who would be, who would kind of be part of the next couple years' strong teams. And in fact, Collins said that he thought that, coming in at 18 on such a veteran and, soon to be championship level team, maybe affected his development, made him kind of defer when he, maybe in a different situation would have, kind of been forced to sort of be like the primary guy. But
Yeah, and I think that's another difference too with the culture and everything that we talk about now versus then or whatever. Whereas now when a guy came as, I think a lot of guys, you talk about a guy like LeBron who, comes straight from high school and into the league or whatever, and these guys that are playing with him have known about him since he was 12, 13, 14 or whatever, know what he's capable of, know that and understand, hey, that's fine, and give him the confidence that, hey, look, you're the man, like, go do your thing or whatever, like, you're good enough to do this and make this leap or whatever. Whereas I could generally see, not that Dawkins wasn't, a well-renowned, high school player, but yeah, I still think at that time it's a whole different animal when these guys are just not. I mean, it's never happened before. And you look at guys that are going, what is this guy? And I could see from Dawkins' standpoint, him not wanting to say, okay, yeah, just give me the ball and let me do my thing. And they're like, oh, yeah, who are you? Like, we've been, we're veterans, we're this, I could absolutely see it being a big deal then compared to now. And I think we take it for granted now that we've, seen so many players. Maybe not, the prep to pro doesn't happen, now anymore, of course. But obviously the one and dones, I don't think are on a different maturity level than a ton of those either. I mean, it's not much different. So we talk about that and yeah. But I think to do it and be the trailblazer in something like that, I think is really significant. I don't know if we give enough, kind of credit to guys like Moses Malone and Darryl Dawkins in terms of being the trailblazers for that. And obviously it took many, many years for it to, come back, and it was Kevin Garnett, as you mentioned. But I think there's something to be said for that. I mean, that has to be a daunting task to be an 18-year-old and just hop into the league at that time and in that era is impressive.
Yeah, and in the next year, in the 77 season, Dr. J joins the team. Henry Bibby and Caldwell Jones are added as well. Cunningham retires. And Dawkins only plays 684 regular season minutes, but he played 331 in the playoffs. So he was a big part of that. They made the finals that year after beating the defending champion Celtics and then beating the Moses Malone-led Rockets. And famously, we talked about this a bit on our last podcast. Famously, they made the finals against Portland. They were up 2-0, and then they lost the next 4 games. And kind of the game-changing or the series-changing incident was a fight between Dawkins and Maurice Lucas, and there was sort of an incident where after he felt his teammates didn't, give him his back during that time, he was so mad that he tore lockers from the walls. He caved in a toilet stall and barricaded the door so that the team could not get back into the dressing room. So, and that was kind of credited for being, basically changing around the entire series and leading to Portland winning. And I'm sure there was more to it than that, but that's, just and they were very much a team with a lot of guys. They had a lot of guys who wanted to score. World Be Free. George McGinnis was a gunner. Irving was a great player, but he obviously, was, the primary scorer generally. So there were a lot of mouths to feed there. So a lot of interesting chemistry there. But obviously, I think the thing that he deserves credit for certainly is like, hey, he's a 20-year-old and he's putting serious minutes in for a team that came very close to winning a championship.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we talked about that a little bit where you have a guy who maybe at this point, the accomplishments. I mean, we talk about, a guy that maybe doesn't have the sort of resume and the backing and this is one of those years where you kind of look at it and you look at, oh man, with all that talent and with, this guy being one of the primary guys, like, they couldn't do it. And again, I don't think that's fair at all. And I think, yeah, it's we don't really talk about this team all that much because, they didn't, end up winning it all, but it's a really, really good, like historically real good team as well.
Yeah. I mean, and they made, as we'll kind of go through, they made 4 finals in 6 years, or I'm sorry, 3 finals in 6 years. And until, and then they won the championship the year that he left. But it's still, I mean, they were a very good team. They were always contenders there, and he was a big part of that team. And he was growing in his role. I mean, in 78, he's up to he's basically a full-time player. He's off the bench, but he's playing 25 minutes a game, up to 1,700 minutes. Cunningham becomes the coach 6 games into that season. And they're the same team otherwise. They perform well during the regular season and sweep the Knicks in the playoffs, but then they were upset by the Bullets, who ended up winning the title that year in the Eastern Conference Finals. The Bullets only won 44 games, and the Sixers won like 56 games, or and we're a real good team. And 79 is a watershed year because 79 is he broke 2 glass backboards in a 3-week span. The first one, the really, really famous one with just like the glass like shattering, and then and Robazine like putting his hands over his head and everyone trying to get out of the way. And
I watched that again. I was like, dude, that guy, like, he doesn't get out of the, like, and I get, like, you don't really kind of know what's happening in that moment, but you look at the replay and you look at, Dawkins kind of knows and gets out of the way. But what you just said his name and I'm blanking
Bill
on it
Robazine,
right now.
yeah.
Yeah, he's just like under it. It's just like falling out of it. He's just like, he just covers his eyes with his hands and it's like, oh my God, like I can't imagine what that, like just glass just falling into your face. Like it's really remarkable. It's such a fun video to watch. I've seen it like 100 times, but just, people replaying it now, it's just amazing to see it. It's just like the most, poignant display of just, athleticism and strength. Like you don't just seeing that guy just rip that thing apart. It's unbelievable. I love it. It's just one of my favorite things to watch in NBA history. Like my favorite highlight almost ever of NBA history.
Yeah.
That and the one where Shaq grabs like the whole freaking, like the basket just comes down, he just rips it apart. It's like, oh my God, like what are you? Like what the hell?
Right.
Like, just...
Yeah. I like it's the chocolate thunder flying, Robazine crying, teeth shaking, glass breaking, rump roasting, bun toasting, wham bam, glass breaker, I am jam. So
yep.
It took him a week to come up with that one, but that's a pretty good name.
That's another great story too. When I was reading the articles, people were like, "What do you call that one, Dawkins?" He's like, "I don't know yet." Like, and then like comes back with a week later with a piece of paper. Here, this is what you should call it. Like, that's the best part too. Is that I know this guy generally went home and was like, "Okay, let's think here. Like, what am I going to call this thing?" Like, I can't because you can't just throw something out immediately. And like, it's got to be a big deal because this is like a historic thing. So I'm glad he waited and made it worth it. And this was definitely a worth it name. So.
So the Sixers, they kind of fell a bit to only 47 wins. Irving had a kind of a down year that year for whatever reason. But he bounced back in a big way the next year. And then that was Dawkins' first year past 2,000 minutes, which he would basically stay, for the most part for the rest of his career until he, started to be filled by injuries. The Sixers traded McGinnis for Bobby Jones. Roby Free was traded to the Clippers and I didn't know this until now, for the pick that became Charles Barkley in '84. So,
oh, nice.
I know you love that sort of thing.
I do love that. Yes,
that's Maurice Cheek's first his rookie year, and the Sixers beat the Nets that year, who were one of our choices for worst playoff teams ever in our worst playoff teams ever podcast. But they fell to the Spurs in 7 games in the second round. So, that was sort of a that was a strong first year or a strong kind of first like big year for Dawkins, and he averaged 13 points, 6.5 rebounds in 26 minutes a game. The next year he'd play 32 minutes a game, be up to 14.7 minutes and 8.7 rebounds. That was probably the peak season of his career in Philly in terms of production. When he moved to New Jersey, he did have slightly stronger raw totals anyway. And he would always he was pretty efficient in his shooting. I mean, he led the league in true shooting percentage later on in his career. I mean, he didn't have much of a range, but I feel like the other thing about him is like he didn't really have a polished game, but he certainly had an effective game. And I think people tend to look at like an unpolished game and sort of think like, oh, he's not working hard. When if it's working, if it's effective, it's effective. Yeah,
exactly. No, and it's not like he wasn't going to be your prototypical sort of, especially at that time, or what we think of. I got like a Tim Duncan or whatever, or like a back to the basket guy who's going to outmove you and outsmart you and all that sort of stuff. He was going to use a lot of his raw ability that he had, and a lot of the raw skills. But yeah, like you said, he wasn't a guy who just couldn't finish. I mean, when he got near the rim, he finished, and it's he's top 10 all time in effective field goal percentage. He's 14th all time in true shooting percentage. Yeah, so he it wasn't like a guy who he was great at that. I mean, he was great at putting the ball in the basket when he was nearby. I mean, 7th all time in an effective field goal is nothing to slouch at. There's a lot of real big guys that are taller than him, probably guys that are stronger than him that have way less, rankings than that. So he was good at that. I mean, that was his game, and you can't really fault the guy for that. He wasn't he wasn't going to outwork you with back to the basket moves and dribbles and all that sort of stuff, but he was going to score on you if you were near the rim. So
yeah, absolutely. And Then 1980, they make the finals but lose to the Lakers in 6. They do blow through the Bullets, the Hawks, and famously the Celtics. That was Larry Bird's first season. They were roughly the same team, except they added Lionel Hollins in midseason. We talked about that a little bit in our last podcast as well. And then in 81, they're up to 62 wins. They added Andrew Toney. That was Doug Collins last year. He only played about 12 games. Henry Bibby was also off the team. So they're kind of making the transition to, they have almost all the key players they would have on the later Sixers teams that would, kind of extend, be pretty good through until like 86 or so. And have lost most of the guys from the 77 team, except of course for Dr. J. And then 82, they're still just about as good, 58 wins, but Dawkins only played in 48 games, although he returned for the playoffs, and that kind of led to like a little bit of a division in the organization because he thought that he showed a lot of hard work and in coming back from that injury and playing through that and coming back early, and then he felt like the 76ers owner and some of the management and coaches kind of just said like that they thought he didn't consistently work hard enough for the money he was being paid, and that was kind of a theme throughout his career. I mean, there were a lot of people, even teammates of his, who said like, maybe he didn't really work the hardest. He didn't necessarily consider it serious business. There were kind of there's an SI article that you kind of referenced from one of his coaches. I'm blanking on who that was right now, but
Dave Wohl.
That's right.
Dave
yes,
Wohl.
and and said that, there were kind of split opinions about whether college would have helped him. Most people kind of thought he would. Dr. J kind of said like, well, he didn't always work the hardest. He was a good teammate, but if he had worked harder, maybe he wouldn't have been able to handle it either because that would have led to, more issues for him. So, but it was just interesting the way that, he was kind of portrayed, and also a little bit of a split personality in terms of, being such a generous guy, but also being a little bit weird about like not always paying guys back for things. And, he had some turmoil in his personal life as well. That led, that it talked about. So it was in 88 kind of when he was basically done in his career. We'd have a little bit of a cup of coffee with the Pistons, but that was basically about it, at least for his NBA career.
Yeah, and of course there's a few years with the Nets or whatever, and famously what he's kind of renowned for, I think, in some ways, is his propensity for fouling. And he in 2 consecutive years, I think it was the 83 was his first year. He set the NBA record for 379 fouls in his season, and then in 1984 topped his own record with 386, and that record remains still the top. So your top 2 personal fouls in a season, Darryl Dawkins, still your man. So yeah. Impressive. Yeah. Very impressive. Not an all-time. I mean, I think I forgot, I don't have it in front of me. I think he's top 10 all-time in personal fouls, but just doesn't have the longevity of other famous foul men. But yeah, no, he's got the number 1 and the number 2 all-time foul seasons. Yeah, his Nets career was I mean, he had, like you mentioned, one of his statistically greatest years in terms of like points and all those things in 1984. But the injuries started piling up for him, and his body just kind of betrayed him, and that's when it really sort of, in a sense, we don't have very vivid memories of his Nets career, in a lot of ways, just because there were so few games that he was playing, and when he was playing, a lot of the effectiveness was starting to leave because the body was just going. I mean, back, knees, feet, ankle. I mean, just everything was kind of piling up.
Yeah, I mean, he did have strong years in 83 and 84. In 84, they did manage to upset the Sixers in the first round, who, of course, were the defending champs. He had been, the reason he was traded to the Nets is to sort of make room for Moses Malone's salary room. Like, Moses was sort of a separate trade based on, he was signed as a free agent, and the trade was for compensation. And then, Dawkins was traded before that to, make room salary wise for him and I guess somewhat of a role as well. But yeah, in 84, he, that may have been his sort of his peak years, 27 that year. He was 16 and 7 or 17 and 7 for the season. Shot well. Other than the propensity to foul, he did well. He actually led the team in scoring in the second round. In a second round loss to the Bucks, he had 22.3 points per game in that series. So I mean, they had they had some potential. I mean, they weren't going to be much better than that. Then they they had their issues too. We talked about that a little bit in the Michael Ray Richardson episode.
Yeah, exactly.
But and then the next two scenes, he was, both were injury plagued seasons. And then from 87 to 89, he played 26 games over 3 seasons, played 4 games in Utah and 16 games in Detroit to end his career. He was on the 89 Pistons, but it was not part of the postseason roster, so he never got a ring, unfortunately.
Boo. I'm sorry.
But he had a nice, he had a fun post-playing career. He spent some seasons in the Italian League. He played for the Globetrotters for a little bit. In 1996, he would have been about close to 40 by then. He was with the Sioux Falls Skyforce of the CBA. And then was, finally retired in 2000. He, as we mentioned before, was ambassador of the game. Made the transition to coaching as well as the head coach of the Lehigh Carbon Community College men's basketball team. So, he was around the game for, basically his entire life, and did, a lot of neat stuff.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. I mean, we live in a society now where this is, something that's possible. And it's almost kind of sad as I went through, Darryl Dawkins' Twitter account, because people were saying, he was, just a few days ago tweeting about the Little League World Series or whatever. So I went and I was trying to, look at what he did. And as I mentioned, in our earlier portion, you see him and he's sharing a bunch of pictures of him just at like a rec center, just teaching. I think they're like 10 or 11-year-old girls or something like that. And there's Darryl Dawkins on the sideline in his nice suit, like coaching them. And that's something like that is just so cool to see a guy who isn't sick of the game at any point. Up until the day he died, literally, he was not sick of the game, like enjoyed the game, still liked going out there, and still, as you said, the ambassador of the game. And I think that's the most important thing that I always got from him. And that's my earliest memories of Darryl Dawkins were, growing up and as a judge in the dunk contest. Like every single year they would cut to the table and there's Darryl Dawkins in his awesome suit, holding up a number, talking about the guys that are dunking or whatever. And it's just, I love that aspect of him. That's something I really just enjoyed about, researching about him and reading about him and all that sort of stuff, is that guy who just loved the game of basketball, loved just living, loved being Darryl Dawkins. I mentioned the quote earlier. He was perfectly happy just being himself, and just a guy who just seemed to enjoy everything about his life. And that's something that's really cool. Like nothing at any point seemed to really get him down or get him depressed or get him upset. Like that's when you read about him, and we're reading stories here and we're reading this sort of stuff. And yeah, there was some issues, in the late 70s with his personal life and that sort of stuff. But pretty much from like that point until, earlier this week when he passed away, it's everything. He's pretty much just a guy who just, you don't hear anything really bad about him. Nobody says anything bad about the guy. No one says, oh yeah, but he did this. I mean, it's just, the only thing you hear is, he didn't reach his potential. And we kind of talked with Yago, that's, shut up. Like, who cares?
Yeah, he was the guy that people
go away.
He was the guy people seemed to like having around. So that's certainly worth quite a lot.
Exactly.
And I mean, I just love some of the colorful stuff about him that he created the whole, a persona that he was the alien from the planet Lovetron. He frolicked with his girlfriend, Juicy Lucy, and spread the gossip of interplanetary funkmanship. It's from a Fran Blindberry piece at NBA.com. And he had kind of a quote about talking about the backboard breaking dunk, and said, I wasn't snarling or spitting at anybody. I was never trying to hurt anybody or be mean. I was just having fun. And yes, I knew all about marketing. And that's the kind of thing that I think, like, Dawkins was certainly like a guy who, he liked to have the attention on himself. He liked to show off. He liked the, he signed his first pro contract wearing a bright red suit and top hat. And World Be Free said that Dawkins glowed in the dark, from his wardrobe, and Mike Dunleavy had a story about how Dawkins drove a Corvette that was painted so many colors that Dunleavy said it looked like a meteorite. So, I mean, the point being is that, like, it wasn't like it was showing off, but it was all meant to be in fun. It wasn't like trying to, like, necessarily, like, completely, like, destroy the other guy or to be like, to embarrass anyone else. It was just sort of like, we want to be a goofball. We want to, to have fun. And that's,
yeah.
And that's neat. I think before we go, we need to talk about our favorite dunks and some of the best dunk nicknames as well.
Yes. Well, actually, two things real quick. Yeah, one thing that I mentioned, and sort of I just wanted to mention this because it was something I want to talk about when we did this entire thing, is that one thing that I got from Dawkins and reading about him and researching him and all that sort of stuff is that, and you kind of alluded to it in the last point, he was a showman, he was entertaining or whatever, but he's the rare case of a showman who's also super humble. It's very weird, and I don't know quite how to describe it, but if you kind of know and have researched and looked at Dawkins, that's sort of what he was. He's a guy who loved being the center of attention, but at the same time didn't necessarily want to be you know what I mean? Like he was happy just being himself, but also at the same time himself was kind of like, yeah, I kind of want people to look at me. I don't want everybody to, care about every move I'm doing, but you should look at me because I'm pretty fun to look at, and I do fun things and I'm entertaining and all that sort of stuff. And I thought I enjoyed that. And another thing, it was a tweet from Dave McMahon, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, who told the tale about his dad. So essentially, I'll read the tweet here real quick. It's not a whole lot, but this is like my favorite story of the day that I read. My favorite Darryl Dawkins story told to my dad by a former equipment guy for the 76ers and retold by my dad a thousand times. At some point in the early 80s, and the Sixers regular season practice facility is out of commission for the day. So the players have to report to some rinky-dink high school gym on the main line for practice instead. It's dead of winter. The gym is drafty, low ceiling, stage behind the basket, uneven hardwood floor. You get the picture. Definitely not NBA caliber. The team is warming up, and Dr. J complains about the conditions in the layup line. Dawkins tells Irving all in this practice right now before it can even begin. And then he says, the man known as Chocolate Thunder takes his place in the line, goes up for a dunk, purposely tearing the rim down in the process. Practice is over, coach, he went on to tell Billy Cunningham.
There's another great story that from the SI article from Cunningham, where he basically says Darryl wasn't pushing himself, so I stopped practice. I went over to him and really read him the riot act, really yelled at him. He had his head down and promised me he would do better. And then he later says, and then as I walked away, he tripped me. I couldn't believe it. What can you do? I finally cracked up laughing like everyone else.
How do you get mad at that guy? And the smile too. I mean, I'm sure if he was being a real dickhead or something, he just smiled and you were like, all right,
there you go.
He just had a great, such an all-time great smile. We were like, all right, I'm sure Billy, imagine an NBA coach, tripping an NBA coach. Pretty much anybody else would get even shoot out more, but it was him, and it was like, oh, all right. Can you imagine Jack? You don't trip Jack Ramsey.
You would probably not trip Rick.
I don't think that was going to go well.
But probably helpful that Cunningham had just been a player a year or two before.
Exactly.
But
right,
yes,
right,
yeah. So what are your favorite dunks, or what's your favorite dunk of his non-backboard shattering edition?
Yeah, I think going through the highlights and watching, one of my favorite ones. I mean, there was one where the NBA had a top 20 Darryl Dawkins dunks video. If you want to seek that out, the number one is I agree with the number one. It's probably not my favorite, but my God, there's one where someone takes a shot, it's off or whatever. So 3 Phoenix Suns go up for a rebound, and Dawkins just skies over all of them and does a putback. Yeah. And it's the most incredible thing because all these guys, and these guys aren't just on their toes, they're kind of jumping, but he just jumps so far ahead of all of them that he just goes and gets the rebound and dunks. It's just incredible. I'm cool with that number one. The one that I love though, and it's one of my favorite dunks of all time, and guys don't really do it anymore. It's very it's very 80s. It's very late 70s, 80s is perfect for him. Is the the behind the head two-handed dunk, the ferocious, guys don't do that one anymore. And if they do, it's very rare, but that, you know what I mean, where you completely bent elbows and just bam, just throw that thing in there. And that's one of my favorite ones to do on I'm not coordinated enough, so when I'm dunking on 7-foot rims, I can't really do between the legs and all that mumbo jumbo, so I have to do this one, and that's sort of just my favorite one because there's just so much power, and you can make the sound of that one sound so cool because you just throw that ball down, and Dawkins was so good at that one. I loved when he did that one, but yeah, that's gonna be my favorite. I don't have a specific one. I don't know what he named that one, but yeah, the behind the head, two-handed, just jam right there. I love that one.
Yeah, mine. I liked the swing over the shoulder. I guess it's sort of a windmill type dunk. It was number 7 on the list, and I see it done otherwise, but that one is just for him, at that size and strength, kind of get that rotation and get that. It wasn't just a power dunk; it was a grace and power dunk.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things of watching this sort of highlights is that's a guy who he had those ferocious dunks, and he had, obviously, I mean, we talked about that a bunch, but he had also ones too, and watching those highlights where there were ones that were pretty finesse style. I mean, if he was a guy who, as you said, in terms of like the dunk culture, if he had came up, 10 years later or, 15 years later, like a guy like, being that size and being able to have that combo, I mean, that's a dunk contest legend there. A guy that can kind of do both those things of finesse and power, but of course he came in an era where it wasn't quite at that level yet. But yeah, no, his dunks are the thing of beauty, and you don't want to just focus on the dunks and just focus on that, but still, the guy was an all-time great dunker. Like, there's no way around it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as far as the nicknames go, so these are all the nicknames that I could find for his dunks. Yo Mama, Spine Chiller Supreme, Rim Wrecker, Dunk You Very Much, Hammer of Thor, Flopadop, Gorilla, Sexophonic Turbo Delight, Look Out Below, the In Your Face Disgrace, the Cover Your Head, and the Spine Chiller Supreme. So what's your favorite name?
I think I'm gonna go with Gorilla because let's see. Oh man, that was that. I jumped into that. I shouldn't do that. Let me think here. I think the In Your Face Disgrace.
Oh, see, that was gonna be mine. So now
I'm sorry. Yeah, read them all. I mean, that is definitely the best.
one. That one's great. I like the Dunk You Very Much, and the Sexophonic Turbo Delight. I'm not gonna turn up my nose at that one.
I wish I owned an ice cream parlor. You know what I mean? Like, these are all really awesome names. Like, did he ever do that? Did he ever franchise a series of ice cream stores?
It could be like a Darryl Dawkins,
Right.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, how did he not do he had to have done that, right?
I mean, you would think so.
What a waste.
Maybe the Dunkin' Donuts people. If you could just like coordinate with the Dunkin' Donuts people, that would have been, there's exactly a good idea there.
I got to imagine the Ben & Jerry's Corporation called that man at some point to name, right? Like, there's no way there wasn't an ice cream flavor that he wasn't at least at some point consulted on, right?
Yeah.
There's just no way. I'm not listening to it. There's no way.
So anything else, Rich?
No, I think that's it. I think we did a good job covering him, and like you said, it sucks because this is the guy that was always on our list of a guy. Hey, let's do like a really long, in-depth podcast about. And unfortunately, he jumped the list by a lot, and that it's unfortunate like that that we had to do it under these circumstances. But with that said, I think you look at this guy, and I think what's been cool about the past few days is it's been, and that's what I really like when. I don't like death, of course, but when death can be sort of a situation where people can, either discover stuff they didn't know, learn about a guy's career, learn about a guy's life, and just celebrate his life and celebrate his career and all that sort of stuff. And that's been the best thing that I've enjoyed about this week and, the stuff after, his passing is people have come out with these great stories and these great articles, and I'm just seeing videos and all that sort of stuff. And it's a guy that you're getting an extra appreciation for. And it sucks that it takes the death to do that, but in a lot of ways, it's let me appreciate this guy a lot more, and a guy that I don't think I necessarily did appreciate, very much until his passing. So it sucks in that respect, but it's cool too that we can come on here and talk about him and talk about his career and talk about his life and really enjoy doing it and really have a fun time with it. So
yeah, for sure. So you can check us out. Of course, podcast is housed at harvardparoxysm.com. You can Over and Back now has its own iTunes feed in addition to the HP Network iTunes feed. So we would love reviews and ratings in both if possible. But either one, we would be happy. And you can find our forums at overandbacknba.com. We're on Twitter and Facebook, both at overandbacknba. And yeah, we'll be back next week with some more episodes of our Top 50 project, which we plan to continue until just before the season begins. So hopefully everyone's enjoying that. Hopefully everyone enjoyed our last episode on the breaks of the game, which is one of my favorite ones I've ever done. So until next time, thanks very much.